We are so happy to have you join us for the annual Zebra Technologies Super Bowl press conference. I'm Therese Van Ryn, and I lead external communications for Zebra Technologies. Before we introduce you to our esteemed panel, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Zebra. Zebra is the official real-time location solutions provider for the NFL. In addition to working with the NFL, we work with enterprises around the world, helping them digitize and automate their workflows. In fact, we work with about 80% of the Fortune 500 in industries including manufacturing, retail, transportation logistics, and healthcare. Obviously, we work in sports too, and we are thrilled to be here today to give you a Super Bowl preview through the lens of next-gen stats. Let's meet our starting lineup. First, we have Troy Vincent. He's the Executive Vice President of Football Operations for the NFL. We have Amy Sullivan. She's our North America and Sports Marketing Lead for Zebra. Next up, Josh Helmrich. Josh is the Senior Director of Media Strategy, Business Development, and Next Gen Stats for the NFL. Tyler's with us. Tyler Williams is Vice President of Player Health and Performance for the Minnesota Vikings. We also are thrilled to have Julie Souza. She's the Head of Sports and Global Professional Services for Amazon Web Services. And last but certainly not least, Makea Puka Nacua. He is an LA Rams wide receiver and finalist for Offensive Rookie of the Year. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. All right, now before we dive into questions from you, I've got a few things I'd like to ask our panelists, starting with Josh. Josh, tell us about the NFL's next-gen stats and what impact will they have during the Super Bowl?
At its core, next-gen stats is our player and ball tracking initiative. And so taking a step back, football forever has been described as a game of inches, but one that is measured in yards. And it had a base set of statistics that didn't really evolve over time. And so with the advancement of technology, about 10 years ago, we set out to try to use technology to help explain, contextualize, better understand the game on the field. And the hope was that if you do that, you can really benefit the entire ecosystem of the NFL. You can make coaches, players, scouts better prepared. You can have the fans better understand the action, the media better present it, our health and safety team can better study the game, et cetera. And so we searched the world for different technology vendors and decided Zebra was the best partner for the NFL, and then Amazon came along and really took that data to the next level and allowed us, every year we continue to add new data points to our data set to help better contextualize what is happening on the field, how to explain it, how to quantify it, what was previously not able to be quantified. So on Sunday, you'll see it much in the ways I just described. You'll see it on television. You'll see it in the venue. And I'm sure right now the coaches and the players are using it to prepare for the game on Sunday. And so to that point, I think we're going to show two videos, which actually are going to air in stadium on Sunday, but we're going to debut them now. They use some of the data that I just talked about to help explain why the Chiefs and why the Niners have had the success that they've had.
Amazing. Let's roll the videos.
AI from Amazon Web Services is providing fans with insights like never before. Defenses have tried to contain the Niners' playmakers, but San Francisco's superstars have done damage after the catch all season. The 49ers' offensive weapons have excelled at creating chunk plays after the catch, racking up the most yards after the catch over expected of any offense league-wide.
Broken tackle by Deebo Samuel, runs for a first down, 30, 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown!
A deep supply of playmakers has kept defenses honest. Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk all ranked among the top 15 in yards after the catch over expected this season.
Brandon Ayuk gets deflected. Caught! Ayuk caught it out of the air.
What unit is capable of stopping the 49ers stars? The Chiefs' swarming defense allowed the second fewest yards after the catch over expected this season.
Just completely wrapped up in red.
AWS is how the NFL is taking next-gen stats to the next level. AI from Amazon Web Services is providing fans with insights like never before. Equipped with one of the fastest motors in the league, Nick Bosa has created chaos in opposing backfields all season.
Sack by Nick Bosa. His second sack for the championship game.
Bosa leads the NFL with 104 pressures this season, the fourth most in a single season since 2018.
From the 10-yard line, look out! And that's Nick Bosa.
Terrorizing Patrick Mahomes in the big game is not unfamiliar to Bosa. Bosa generated 9 pressures against the Chiefs in Super Bowl 54.
Nick Bosa knocked it out of the hands of Mahomes in a loss of 7.
Bosa meets his match in Chiefs tackle Jawan Taylor. Taylor's average time to pressure allowed this season was the longest among offensive tackles.
All kinds of time. And Kelsey caught it!
AWS is how the NFL is taking next-gen stats to the next level.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing those with us.
Yeah, the team, some of whom are here, do a great job every week for every broadcast, pulling together a lot of great data. I think some of which we handed out to folks who came in, but there is a ton of data that helps tell the story, and which previously was subjective and now is objective fact that we can help explain what's happening. And so every year we get a little bit better, but the team does a great job at helping to pull the data together.
Thank you. Julie, how are artificial intelligence and machine learning being applied to real-time player and ball tracking in the development of the latest next-gen stats?
Sure. I think it's interesting, though, to just think of where we've come with the collection of this data. I mean, when I was growing up, I'm old, the raw data of sports was a box score, and you looked at that and it made sense, right? Now the raw data of sports is degrees of latitude and longitude, and in the case of the NFL, we're collecting 300 million points of data per season. Nobody's sitting there with Excel, right? Nobody's sitting there with a clipboard. This is absolutely a job for machine learning and artificial intelligence to glean insights out of that. And those use cases, Josh named a bunch of them. I mean, this is helping players prepare and coaches prepare. It's helping Tyler and his team look at player health and safety and how to, put the best training regimen out there to both support the players in their performance and in their health and recovery too. So, because of the volume of data that we're collecting, that Zebra's collecting, it absolutely requires sophisticated machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Josh, what are some of the new stats that were introduced this season based on these machine learning capabilities?
So as I mentioned earlier, every year we try to develop a more robust tool set and build on what we've already built. And so when we started with simple things like how open somebody gets, how fast they run, it was really with AWS's help that we're able to take those huge data sets and do things like probability, expected rushing yards, expected catch probability. Because it's such a huge data set, the machine learning is essential to help to do that. So this year we focused on in the trenches, how do you identify the impact defense and offensive line are helping and so are having. In the past it was, did a guy get a sack or not? And it was really hard to quantify anything other than sacks. And now we look at pressure probability, which we talked about in the video, to really say he didn't get a sack there, but he's really having an impact on that play, and he's doing it more frequently than anyone else. That's why he's so effective, even though it's not showing up in the traditional stat line or box score that Julie mentioned. So I would say rushing pressure probability was a big one this year for us.
Mm-hmm. Julie, back to you. This season, Prime Vision launched with Next Gen Stats alternate stream on Thursday Night Football. How have the fans responded?
They love it. I mean, I think the point of all this data, if it comes out there and it's difficult to understand or it feels a little alienating or heady, then we are doing it wrong. The whole point is to make things more understandable, more accessible. And when fans understand and feel smart about what they're watching, they will watch more of it, right? So I think it's like anything else. This is an evolution, and it's seeping into the vernacular now, right? Players are starting to ask about, stats that they didn't have access to in the past, right? Coaching staffs are leaning in. Digital athlete, which we're working on with the NFL, which I'm sure Tyler will talk about, that all comes into play too in leveraging that data. But, I think it's great. I personally love it, and we're getting really great feedback from it on Thursday Night Football.
That's great. Troy, Julie talked about making the data accessible. I'm wondering, from your point of view, how are teams using next-gen stats in player performance, evaluation, and preparation?
It has changed dramatically. The evolution, I think Julie said it actually best.
You know, when you first came and everything was about video, you watched a video, now you have all of these data points to almost confirm or verify what you think is in your mind is going on. It is going on, and you can actually have a data point to say, yes, this is happening. The evolution, starting with Zebra and now with Amazon, I'm amazed, fascinated at what people like to see from lines and Josh's group, how fast is the ball going. You see clubs tracking from a player wellness standpoint, the performance aspect. We actually using it with our officials. The officials are not talked about much, but just tracking where they are pre-snap, post-snap. But the evolution of the data and these data points, one player to another player. So it is changing, it is ever evolving, fascinating. What we have to manage, and part of my daily job is how much is too much?
Right.
And making sure that we don't create an arms race where one club is doing more than another, which we know that is happening during the week, that doesn't show up on Sunday, where there is true competitive balance with data sharing, data collecting, actually on game day.
How can the use of performance data help identify future NFL stars like Puka?
So this is one where our college relationship, if we can advance that, we can actually advance scouting. Looking at a player that may be a freshman in college, sophomore, but in particular those juniors that are eligible, draft eligible, or the seniors, to get ahead of how can I compare Puka to a Debo? Now, sooner, what is his short quickness, his speed to power? All of these data points allow scouting insight on his performance. What is his load like? So before he gets to a club, you get, experts like Tyler to talk through, here's where we are, coach, with this athlete. He's very similar, and we live in this traditional world of who is he like? He's like this particular player. All of his data points suggest that we may have this kind of player, this all-star player, this all-pro player entering on our roster.
And we'll have more data to work with in the upcoming seasons as a result of tracking the Big 12 Pro Day in March, right?
Yeah, so looking forward to that. This is a new partnership with the Big 12. And how do we look into the future, doing things differently, some of the technology that we're able to grab? How do we look at athletes and, frankly, find a diamond in the rough? Potentially there's an athlete that may not show up in Indy that may have some data points that suggest, we should maybe be taking a look at this student athlete or this particular prospect. So just doing some things that are different, maybe comparing and overlaying some as they compete. So we just think that the technology allows us to look into the future and maybe find some that may not be visible from the eye. Someone may have not seen him play, but the data points allow us the insight on that individual athlete.
Puka, what data points do you consider when you're preparing for a game?
So I was just barely made aware that I'm actually, I thought I was not looking at any data points. I was like, I just really look at the guys, the body types. I'm like, let me see how tall this guy is. Let me see how much he weighs, and I'm pretty good. And then it was saying that I look at the speeds, and I look at the stuff where Coach Witherspoon comes to me after practice. I know if he's walking towards me with his iPad and he's looking down and he's no words, he's just looking like this, and he's like, all right, I got to sprint fast because that means I was jogging during practice to him. But some of that stuff, and I guess stuff they were talking about that makes me really interested is like creating how much separation as a wide receiver, understanding. For like coach as a wide receiver, I say I'm always open. Like that's what you're supposed to say is I'm always open, coach. But now coach can tell me if I was open or not. But it's stuff like that where it's like I didn't know I was looking at some of those data points, and it's so interesting to see because I know especially every day we're walking out of practice, they put up the fastest speeds of the day for each position group, and as the wide receiver, I like to think I'm fast. My name's kind of always at the bottom of that list, but it's always some of the guys who are a lot lighter. It's crazy to see how fast some of these guys move and how they use that data to help us not practice or make sure that you got to practice more and stuff like that. So, and how that influences kind of my week of routine and how I lift and then how I try to take care of my body as well. So I didn't know I was consuming a lot of data, but I'm well aware now.
And is it safe to presume this will be important in the future as well, this next-gen stats data?
I would say 100%. The ability to pinpoint what is helping you and what's not helping you, and to at least know if I'm headed in the right direction. I think the AI and the ability to know more information will be a great asset to every athlete for sure.
Excellent, thank you. Tyler, how do you use data to prepare athletes for the peak championship game?
Yeah, that's a great question. We always say you can't improve what you don't measure. So for the course of time in the NFL, we've been measuring everything from reps to plays to sets in the weight room to players' weights, and trying to find ways to measure their speeds. And now we just have, through Zebra Technologies and AWS, we have effective and efficient ways through that technology to collect all that information, to get into the hands of people like myself or the coaching staff or other subject matter expertise to enhance their decisions. I think Troy and Josh said it about enhancing our gut, right? So for the longest time, we used to sit down with the coaching staff and plan a strategy and a long roadmap from off-season conditioning all the way to try to get to the Super Bowl every year. And now we have ways to strategize with a great plan to go through that whole roadmap with trying to mitigate the risk of making sure we don't run out of gas towards the end. It's a long season, that first season for Puka, going from college to pro. So how can we help him manage that plan without getting to the big game where he's not ready to peak physically to be the best version of himself on the big stage? And that's what we want for every individual athlete. So by measuring all their yards, their high speeds, their accelerations, their decelerations, we're able to fine-tune a plan for each athlete as well as the team globally.
You mentioned avoiding risk. How has your access to this player tracking data helped with risk mitigation?
Yeah, health and safety for these guys are our number one priority. So taking in all this information and leveraging it with injury data sets to understand when a player like Puka or when a team is getting overworked or underprepared. As much as Puka doesn't want us to say it, we might go to the coach and say, hey, we need to push him a little bit more today. But being able to find that right balance, not only on a team scale, but positionally, individually, and come up with individual strategies. Training veteran players might look a lot different than putting a plan together for rookies. It might look a lot different we used to train guys on both sides of the ball the same way, but now through all this technology, we understand that defense does something totally different than offense. One knows what they're going to do, one has to react. And even in those positions, you're training wide receivers of his size, but some might be 5'11" at 175. So how can we mitigate that risk? And I think every team's doing that at a club level, but I think what NFL Health and Safety's done really well is aggregate the league-wide data into one entity to make that data set a lot more powerful and robust, so we can answer questions with more accuracy because of that power of that data set. And through some of the task forces, we've been able to aggregate all that data league-wide and put it into a visual dashboard through AWS called Digital Athlete. And 2 years ago, we ran 4 pilot teams with that dashboard. And you're able to triangulate your experience, Digital Athlete, what those models are telling you, what that information is telling you, and your own models in your own club to make better decisions on how you're going to push or pull that athlete that day. And this was the first year that dashboard got released to all 32 clubs to enhance that decision-making. And I think the future's bright for that. The more data that goes into that, the more questions that we're going to be able to ask and then find more solutions for.
Excellent, thank you. Amy, we've been talking about the evolution of the data over the years. How has Zebra's relationship with the NFL evolved since 2014?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to reflect on where we started 10 years ago. And, the stat lines that we were celebrating in 2014 were Odell Beckham Jr.'s one-handed grab, or in Super Bowl 49 with the interception, with Malcolm Butler saving the game. And I think, Puka, at that time, you were 12 years old. So I don't know if you remember that. But now you're leading, all of these, the leaderboards for next-gen stats. And, we're implementing machine vision into those stats. And so we're getting so much more rich storylines. And speaking of storylines, you look at this panel, we set out with an original intent 10 years ago, and now you're hearing about all of these variations of and offshoots, which I think is really exciting. Josh, Julie, you guys talked about increasing the fan experience and viewership. Tyler, you're talking about player performance, health and safety. Troy, you're talking about up-and-coming players and entering in the NFL and building their resume using some of these same stats that are available to the pros, but at that college level as they come up. And for us at Zebra, this is what's so exciting is when our clients find an initial need for data collection because they want to measure outcomes and make improvements, but then they see all of these other areas that they can grow. And I think you said ecosystem. It's really an ecosystem of ways to leverage that data. And so it's been a successful 10 years. We're happy to celebrate that 10-year milestone, but really looking forward to what's next. And you can see some inclinations of that here.
That's right. Zebra uses RFID tags to track players and balls, which generates data for the NFL's next-gen stats. But RFID has wider applications as well. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I mean, RFID, the technology has been around for years, but it is really hot right now, not only with the NFL tagging multiple areas of the game. You mentioned the referees, but also in the enterprise side, we're seeing a real surgence in RFID technology. And so that's very exciting. And, if I want to apply it to sports, I think all of us saw the headline at the end of September when Travis Kelce jerseys were up 400%. And that's exciting. But there is also a supply chain story that's happening underlying all of that I think is really exciting too. I mean, retailers are taking those orders. Manufacturers need to make them quickly. We've got warehouse and distribution centers that need to stock them. We've got transportation and delivery drivers that need to get those into the consumer's hands. And as consumers, we expect all of that to happen in real time or as near as possible and seamlessly across those handoffs. So RFID is a technology that allows that to happen. And, it's really exciting for us because everybody has said, what you measure, you can improve. And a lot of the people that are making all that happen are the fans of this game. And it's really cool to see that the technology that's being used across, the people that are doing that are the same technologies that the heroes on the field are using.
It really is. Thanks, Amy. All right, we'd love to open it up to you for questions. If you've got a question, please raise your hand for us. We've got a couple gentlemen with microphones, and we'll have you speak into the microphone with your question.
Puka, we've talked about health. What are some of the data points that have affected your routine in your health, in your recovery, and what are some things that they've helped you change that with, essentially?
Yeah, so our coach who comes after with the iPad is saying, I believe that it's 90% of your max speed that you need to hit a certain amount of times during the week. So that's something that I know if on Thursday I haven't been able to hit my 90% max speed in a route that I have to run it after practice means that, okay, how do I get more sleep? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I hitting enough treatment? Am I getting in the sauna and the cold tub? Am my muscles tightness? So definitely, that's how I think of when I think of this, the simple stuff that I'm using of just one stat of the data of like, hey, you haven't run your certain miles per hour that you need to, and how much that influence of the weekly routine of not being able to. Yeah, I feel like I do get a lot of sleep. Hydration and just our nutritionists and how they use that information to kind of give me a game plan and how I can recognize how I influence or how I can change my habits.
Has it changed dramatically since coming into the pros?
Yes, I was not a good sleeper. College definitely had me up late nights playing video games. Now Cooper Cup wouldn't like that, so I go to bed really early now.
Thank you.
For Women of Fantasy Football, not a fantasy question though. Thank you for everything you do, Puka. Really appreciate you. This question's about, I think it's for you, Tyler, specifically about player health. How are you using these stats and different things in order to help possibly prevent player injury and get the players stronger so we can prevent that going forward?
Yeah, basically one mantra we kind of have is availability is winnability. Like we can go select a player like Puka, but if Puka's not available, it hinders our chances to have the ability to win on Sundays. So measuring all these things and understanding, he just alluded to, did I run 90% of my max speed? if he's hitting that because we know the demands of his position, that's tissue resiliency, right? We've stressed that tissue to the demand he needs to place on the field. So we know he's more protected week in and week out to handle those demands. And then we can put a plan in place to make sure that they are available. And all that comes into play with just when you have one thing down as a team, then you kind of have to drill into those positions that are different. Then to the individuals. When I was with LA, we had Andrew Whitworth, and on the other side, we had Rob. With Minnesota, we have Justin Jefferson, and we have Daniil Hunter, and how we handle those guys as veterans is different from the younger rookies coming in. So every different strategy, all this information comes into play to put the best plan that's individual for that player to be available week in and week out.
This is for Troy Vincent. You were wondering or mentioning that part of your job is to know how much is enough. And that's the question. What is, in your opinion, enough? When the NFL has to say, okay, this is the limit, we should work on it?
Well, so right now we have policies that allow us, we know exactly what information is going to all 32, what day of the week it goes out. We do need to rethink, is it time or are we at a place to give more? Today, there's no technology used, whether that's machine learning, that's outside of an NFL operated on game day, which is really the most important. You know, during the week, we know clubs will invest in this particular area more than others on game day so that we can make sure that we are sure that cheating, there's balance. These are things that we monitor, that we're looking ahead of to try to get in front of, is to make sure there's nothing being applied on game day that we can't monitor. There's no data points. Everything today is, it's equal, it's the same. Every club gets it at the same time. How they use it may be a little bit different, but those are things that we're constantly, public trust is everything. Game integrity is everything. And we don't want to allow, as we would say, we're traditionalists, so we are still catching up, frankly, to the experts here. I mean, we are straight traditionalists, so we're literally catching up to the data, the science, to allow us to be better, the game to be played differently. So that, to answer your question, we have to just monitor what's in the coach's booth and on the sidelines that's available to the coach, to the player, to make sure that there's parity.
Amongst your accolades in your rookie season, during the middle of the year, you were timed, or you were Next Gen released that you ran 21.05 miles an hour. Did that surprise you, and did it give you any bragging rights in the wide receiver room with the Rams?
It did surprise me, actually. But no, sadly it did. We have Tutu Atwell on our team. I think every day in practice, I think his 90% max speed is like 21.8 or something like that. So I think I'm rolling, and then I watch him and he's sprinting right by me, and I'm like, all right, I might as well walk the rest of the way. Like it's no use.
How you guys doing? Yao Bonsu, WRHU. I'm curious, anybody can answer this question, really except Puka, sorry, but when it comes to contract negotiations, last offseason there's a lot of dialogue about the value of the running back. So how can running backs use these advanced analytics? Is there any specific data points that they can use to increase their value when it comes to contract negotiations that front offices may not be seeing at the surface level?
The next-gen stats data is not necessarily used in contract negotiations, but I think to your question, both the agents, and Troy, keep me honest here, but the agents and the people from the clubs are trying to make the case for why their athlete is either worth more or worth what they're trying to offer them to accept, less in the team's case. This data, there's a lot of it that's publicly available, can help contextualize, as I mentioned earlier, why somebody is having success even though it's not necessarily showing up in traditional statistics. So this guy may be really effective at pass blocking, maybe getting open but not getting targets. So you can use data to help tell the story and show how someone's having success even though it doesn't necessarily show up in traditional statistics. And then on the other side, you know, the team would use data to show why somebody who may be having great statistics actually is just a product of the system or some other reason why those numbers aren't necessarily reflective of the performance on the field. That's the point of the data is, can I tell a more accurate picture and unearth something that I couldn't see with traditional statistics?
Josh, obviously you mentioned, how you guys focused on pressure, probability this year. Is there an area that you guys are focusing on for next season and in the future? I know that, the technology is obviously, developing each year.
Yeah, we have a long-running list of statistics that we'd like to work on. AWS helps bring a lot of it to life, but there's a lot that goes into each new statistic. And so what we try to do, the long answer is, what we try to do is continue to round out the toolkit so we can tell a story about offensive line, defensive line, wide receivers, running backs, kickers, like the entire field of play. We want to be able to explain the action as it happens. And so there's a bunch of statistics that we'd like to work on covering the full gamut. So I wouldn't give you one because I don't know definitively what we're going to unveil next year. But I can tell you that the team sitting behind you keeps a long tally every time we come up with a new idea, every time we meet with somebody new. The story that those guys have heard a million times that if you give me 2 seconds, I'll tell you, is we try to identify what is a new story we can tell. One, that we talk to our teams, we talk to our partners in AWS and Zebra, we talk to our TV partners, and we talked to a Hall of Fame quarterback, Kurt Warner, who said, when I retired, completion probability was a real proxy for quarterback accuracy. High completion percentage, very accurate passer. In today's game, there's so many screens that doesn't necessarily line up anymore because you could have a really high completion percentage, but they're all short throws. Can you give me a better way to measure accuracy? And so can I look at how much an in-breaking route or a go route a receiver has to slow down based on where the throw is? Like, am I hitting the receiver in stride? And with the data, you can do that. Now, we have to use machine learning in our data and go develop the stat and weed out use cases that make it, well, he was supposed to come back or it was a back shoulder or whatever. But the data can help tell a better story there. So that's one, for example, that's on our list that we'd like to go do to help tell a better picture.
If I can add to that, one of the things that we're looking at from a competition standpoint, we take those data points and one specific, 15% of the passes are thrown behind the line of scrimmage. So when we look at playing rules, we oftentimes look at the data. What is the data telling us? Quarterback protection. Do we need to evolve how we protect the quarterback out the pocket, in the pocket? This year we're thinking about introducing, and this is, again, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur here, but we still have clubs that have to put data points from who's on the field, personnel groups. They're still writing that on a piece of paper and sharing at halftime because no one wants to, and all of this technology has been available. So one of the things that we're thinking about doing is doing that spreadsheet where they can have it real time. Who's on the field, personnel group, and who's not on the field. That's something that we would like to introduce to the game. But back to some of those other things that we're using it, we literally use these data points to tell us what the game is doing, who's doing it. Again, they talked about QB hurries. We had more sacks this year than in a single season than we've ever had in the history of our game. Okay, why? Why is that happening? The average pass is less than 10 yards. All of those data points tell us how the game is evolving.
One of the other things, too, that we're trying to fight for from a health and safety standpoint, a lot of my colleagues are wanting to get some metrics on not only how far they went, how fast they went, but how many times did he push off his left leg versus his right leg? Can I get that information to the strength coach? Can he now program a strength training plan to make sure that he didn't do 500 off his left and only 300 times off his right? More unique metrics like that can give us some strategies that we can divvy out to the different performance professionals.
Of Ritmo, a couple of questions for anybody who wants to take a shot at it. Julie, I think you mentioned you have millions of data points, and you come up with EVA, expected value added, according to different metrics. But they're cumulative. We had 2 field goals in the NFC Championship game that were controversial, but the 46 and the 48-yarder did not account for the fact that it was a playoff game, the fact that it was indoors, the fact that where the yard actually was, what the score was. my first question is, to what extent are you going to start or even able to get a little more situational with some of this data? The second question goes to you, Josh. You mentioned there's a lot available. Look, I'm a media member. I don't think there's enough. I want to know his Puka's health and wellness issues, but I think there's a lot of sports information that could be made available. At what point will that be made available?
So I'll take your first question first. Or maybe the inverse. The answer is we have a huge data set, and as Troy mentioned, there's competitive balance. We are very methodical in who gets access to what and when. We do sell and license our next-gen stats complete data set, not necessarily in real time. The teams get it on a delayed basis, but media can get access to the next-gen stats. We make a lot of it publicly available for free. We have an NGS microsite, and we have plenty of social media accounts that you can follow and get lots of great insights. But we do release a full data set, essentially, not live, but we do release it. So that's what I would say about the second part. Can you repeat the first part of the question?
I can talk about it a little bit too, because you were asking about the anomalies, right? And how do you quantify that? And so that is accounted for, right? It's not like, all right, let's build a model and let's go, right? It's highly, highly iterative and trying to pull the noise out. And what are those exceptional things that could influence, right? And then how do you get more granular in this particular circumstance, indoor, outdoor, weather, and temperature, all of that? How do we get more and more granular about understanding the context of that data? And I think, Tyler and others mentioned, the more data we get and the more reps we get, the smarter the analytics become. So I think you're going to get to that point of refinement over time. And you're already seeing some of it. We knew, there was always a stat about Peyton and the weather, right? Like, we always knew that. So now you can just take that and extrapolate that across all kinds of conditions, whether it's a playoff game, whether it's, against an opponent that they've been successful against in the past, whatever. That all gets accounted for, and it's a very iterative process. I wanted to say something that didn't really come up here that is curious too, and it touches a little bit to the player health and safety point too, is that this data can help. You use the word evolution, Troy, and I love it. It can help and has helped the league actually change the rules of the game, right, to make it safer. You saw that with helmet detection in the kickoff, so that's another interesting thing, is that it doesn't have to be the same game I grew up watching with the box score, right? It can evolve and get safer or more exciting. And this isn't necessarily a data-related thing, but we saw what happened in baseball, right? Like, let's go, right? Let's get a clock in there. But you start thinking about the game of football in particular, and how do you make it safer? It's training, it's analysis, but it's also rule development over time. So I think that's another cool component.
And I remember the first part of the question. I would add to what Julie said. First, you sound a lot like a lot of the coaches we talked to, which is like, you didn't account for my right guard rolled his ankle on the last play. And the truth is, it's never a perfect picture. The hope is that this gives you more data to make a more well-informed decision. I've had a general manager say, my job is to be as well-informed as possible. You can never predict the future, but I should be as well-informed as possible. This data is better informing it. So the more data you get, to Julie's point, the better the models become, the more accurate the output. But it's never perfect, because there's always some new variable. The game, no play is exactly the same with the same players in the same weather. So the model's never perfect, but the more data you get with the help of machine learning, you get a much better output. So over time, in 10 years, we've gotten a lot better. We're not perfect. We can get a lot more better, but we'll never be perfect.
There's always an art to the science, right? When to apply it, when to apply those learnings, and sometimes, hey, maybe the statistics tell me to do one thing, but I know how angry this player is right now, and I'm going to channel that, right? So
momentum, that's the other thing that people like. How do you quantify momentum?
We are actually doing that with the NHL right now, and you're next.
Nikki Wolcott with Sports Business Journal. For Julie, Amy, and Josh, just with next-gen stats being used more and more by consumers and by people on the football side, how have you seen growth from a business perspective, and how things change now these stats are being consumed by different audiences for different reasons?
From a business perspective, I would say, going back to the opening remarks, next gen, we always had this vision of we want it to benefit the entire ecosystem of the NFL, right? And so we had that vision, And at the beginning, okay, we have to identify a technology partner. Then we have to gather the technology, gather the data, see who uses what parts of it, how do you make it available and when. Now we're at a point where, EA does use it to make Madden. Player health and safety does use it to help study the game. Football does use it to help make rule changes and see where punts go out of bounds. And so there's the indirect value that we provide to that ecosystem, and there's the direct value. You see it in all the broadcasts. They're using it. AWS has been a huge sponsor and a very, very helpful sponsor, not only in getting it on television, but helping grow the data set and making it more valuable, not just to TV people, but to the entire ecosystem. So I still think there's a ton of room to grow. Troy said, hey, we're just taking it one step at a time and keeping our cap on it, but where all these things, even simplistic things like player participation in game, that would be a huge thing. There's obviously a ton more that if I could convince Troy, we'd give the coaches everything, but that wouldn't happen right away. But there's a huge future and potential, and it's an evolution, as Julie said, and over time we continue to see growth, which is great. Prime Vision was another big stair-step moment for us where that's a different way for fans to consume it, and it's had a great reaction from fans. They did it for every game on Thursday night 2 years in a row, highest performing all broadcast. And so the hope is we just find more use cases as we identify which data set is relevant to which consumers.
You had a tremendous data point before about Yak Over Expectations. If we had to do a tale of the tape, which team has the advantage there on Yak plays? Or is that too simplistic of a way to look at it? Do you really have to get granular where you break down how Debo performs on Yak plays versus quarters coverage, or how Kittle performs on flag routes against the middle linebacker, things like that, when you take those data points into account?
So the three people behind you are best equipped to answer that. They pull all the numbers. But the simplistic answer to that is there's sort of two ways to look at it. Yards after catch, expected, and above expected, right? So if a guy is really open, we expect him to get a lot of yards after catch, right? And so that's scheme, that's ability to get open as a receiver, and that's a bunch of things, and that's important and valuable. And so one team leads the league in that. And another is yards after catch above expected. So he was well covered. He wasn't supposed to get that many yards, but he broke a tackle and got a lot more yards. The other team leads the league in that. And so they're both valuable. I don't want to, it's a complex question, but we could give you a lot of data to tell the story, different ways depending on how you look at it, but they're both important and they're both good is the short answer.
We've got time for one more question.
This might exist at some level. I'm over here. With the game coming up, there's a few players that I want to bring up. Christian McCaffrey, one of the most broken tackles players. Isaiah Pacheco, one of the hardest runners. He hits the ground. Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, they hit very hard. Is force something you guys think you can determine going forward, something you can release to the public? Is that possible with this technology, exerting force and things like that, whether it be hitting players, breaking tackles, or hitting the ground?
So force, going back to high school physics, force is, you can calculate it based on speed and size, right? Force times mass times acceleration. We don't actively track that metric. It wasn't something that was important to us, and it's not something we actively track. I think there are ways to calculate it. Different teams in practice, I think, have looked at different things. At a league level, we don't track that. Hard hits are obviously a big part of the game, but that's not something we actively track.
I think one of the future things with that, though, is putting a lot of these zebra sensors in all the different equipment, right? So beforehand, we didn't have those in the cleats. We didn't have those in the pads. We didn't have those in the helmets. So that's just a start right there to then ask a more refined question that leads them to the expertise to be able to solve that problem.
And I think that we looked into it at the beginning. It's complicated because you're going 21 miles an hour, but if you take a hit directly on the head or on the shoulder or you're angled a certain way, it doesn't equal the same force. I mean, the calculation will, but it's really much more nuanced than that. And so we saw a lot of problems and challenges with that problem. And so it wasn't in our short-term roadmap, but I think people are looking at that and trying to figure it out, but it's not something that we actively track.
Just in closing, it's just interesting. We will see the game and the commercial side advance much further than, let's say, we got the player performance side. Why? The coach on Sunday, Mondays, and Thursdays is not looking for technology to advance the inexperience on game day, as we would say, game day adjustments. So you hear that in the room, you need 24 votes to move any kind of policy or rule. When this topic comes up, the room stands up and you get the traditionalists saying, I love all of the technology during the week, but on game day, I don't want technology assisting the guy on the other side of the field. He has to be able, or she has to be able to make the adjustments real time on a clipboard or a still shot. So, I mean, it gets very tense.
For now.
Yeah, for now. But that is that kind of that tug of war that goes back and forth of too much technology. A young coach, as they would say, a young coach who does not have the experience and is looking for data points, when the old savvy veteran is saying, there's no way I would have went for that under this situation, the weather, the momentum, the way things are going, but probability and the data is saying you should go for it.
Well, huge thank you to our panelists. I know I found it very informative. Hopefully you have as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the Super Bowl.